So in part 2 of my book, Yoga and Somatics for Immune and Respiratory Health, we come to an extremely important foundational part for the modern human and our experience and health as a being who is in the 21st century. So very much prone to all the particular stresses, stimulation that brings. And it's really key for us to have an understanding of this, because this is really where yoga practices can come in, physical, meditative, through pranayama, breath practices, and any other type of subtle practices. So within this part, we're placing our biochemistry and therefore our practice within the context of modern living, recognizing that these bodies, these beings that are practicing or that we're teaching are not the same as those who were practicing thousands of years ago or even hundreds of years ago, but they are prone to psychosocial stress. And also a lot of the conditions within immune and respiratory systems are part of a collection of conditions which are often referred to as diseases of Western civilization, and very, very much tied in large bodies of research into the types of emotional and social stresses that we find ourselves quite bombarded with. So really, we also look at here how compassionate embodied awareness, the types of curious, nuanced practices here can help reduce sympathetic dominance or being caught up into sympathetic responses in the autonomic nervous system, or those more fight or flight responses. So we look at stress, inflammation, and the autonomic nervous system in relation to breath and immunity, and looking through the lens of psychosocial stress that can dominate much of the modern human experience. So it's partly why when we arrive in practice, we come to be, allow ourselves to be when we have a world of so much doing. So kind of quick look through some of the components of this part. Now we're delving into the autonomic nervous system here, that part of the peripheral nervous systems, outside the central nervous system, often the stuff that we don't even notice is going along in the background, keeping things going. So much of that is unconscious. And part of our yoga journey is to bring that which is unconscious to consciousness. And we very much meet that through the breath. So you can see this beautiful, I love this scheme, illustration of the autonomic nervous system related to our organs, and that's up through the vagus nerve here in the parasympathetic, and through the HPA axis in the sympathetic. So it gives an idea, we're really looking here at whole body always, and our systems, particularly we're looking at the immune and respiratory system, we're looking at that relationship through the autonomic nervous system. So we're also looking here, we're pulling out little, slight different parts of us to look at, differentiate, look at ourselves as a whole through an awareness of different parts. Phrenic nerve, and phren is Greek for diaphragm, is the main nerve of the respiratory system. Can be associated to some extent with the sympathetic nervous system. Somatic nervous system, with the vagus, the main nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system. So the phrenic nerve runs between the neck and the diaphragm, and so is in relation to how we're feeling and very much the stress responses. So put here to start to give that picture of the relationship that our psychosocial stress has with how we respond, and in turn how we can have a relationship with our autonomic nervous system, and noticing how we are at any given time to come back in to affect our immune and respiratory systems. So we're able to access the relaxation response through our physical and subtle practices and breath awareness, and that is an easeful breath. So rather than being something that's very deep, deep is often a slightly problematic term in terms of breath, because it can bring in something that's more forced, where we're looking in yoga terms to have breath as soft, spacious, smooth, and starting to have that relationship with the diaphragm, and noticing how our stress responses might be held, bracing us into the center, or held in places like the jaw, the shoulders, at the diaphragm, and that sensory motor amnesia, those kind of caught in held systems, can start to let us feel out those places through practice. And we're really looking then to start to quiet this yoga as a cooling practice, as a stilling the mind, as allowing things to come down from more heightened rajasic responses, is really starting to allow immune modulation, coming down from heightened inflammatory responses, which are a survival part of the fight or flight response, and often why many diseases of Western civilization are inflammatory in their root. And it's not that we just want to boost the immune system, it's rather we want an appropriate immune system. So too much, and we can tend to things like autoimmune problems, allergic reactions, the immune system on too high response, overreacting. We can also have under-immune reaction, which tends to leave us not able to handle infection, and what we're looking at here is really finding that regulation between all tones of our nervous system. So that chronic inflammation, you can see here on the left-hand side, very much, large bodies of evidence over decades showing with psychosocial stress what a part they play in these diseases of Western civilization, from mental health to physical health, and where those things are absolutely and utterly interrelated. And of course we talk about relationships with those and the microbiome and the gut later on in the book as well, but inflammation runs right throughout as a point of reference. And so we come to looking at the regulation between oxygen and carbon dioxide as a way that our immune system modulates, a way that we are able to use immune components like nitric oxide that we produce and utilize through nasal breathing, and how that ties into inflammation. So we explore those throughout. And of course, of interest to people at the moment is how that all ties in to COVID-19, whether that's for a current infection of that, whether that's prevention, or whether that's looking at a post-viral fatigue in long COVID. And so we look at the inflammation cascade as a well-researched components, particularly for people who have more severe symptoms or tend towards long COVID. So this hyperinflammation is a terminology that's used, that inflammatory cascade seem to be very much, up regulated and not able to be quelled in those who tend to those more profound symptoms within COVID. So we cover that as well as something that's we can bring practice in as such a beautiful way to support that myriad of health. Thank you. And in the next part, I will look at practices in that part that help to support those.